I'm the Right Reverend Marty Stebbins, Bishop of Montana.
And I am the Venerable Dorcie Dvarishkis, current Archdeacon of the diocese.
And today we're going to be going through a variety of Eucharistic preparations for deacons to observe and hopefully have discussion about. We'll have both look at both Anglo-Catholic as well as broad church.
We hope that this will be a very instructive time and also give you a sense of comfort and confidence as you begin your journey as a deacon and being entrusted with this precious role.
So in looking at the variety ways that clergy, particularly priests and this bishop, celebrate Eucharist, that will hopefully give you the flexibility to roll with how they celebrate. And so I think we can begin.
We're going to start with, you can see that we are set up for the Lenten season, which is often a more simple setup than we might have at other times of the year. But we're going to start with what we experience most often and then present some nuance as we go through as well.
As we start the preparation, a couple of things to remember. One, you may have an established altar guild who will do the setup and it will be ready to go when we are going to be doing Eucharist. Other times you may be having to help the priest, especially if you are assigned to a congregation that has only supply clergy coming in to celebrate the Eucharist. I think for me the biggest thing for both priests and deacons to remember is that you are approaching the Lord's table, and this is a time to be deliberate in your motions, and also that this is a time to prepare for your own prayer during the Eucharistic prayer. So if you have a very anal retentive priest, it means that they will want to be centered on the altar, and they'll want things squared up. And we'll go through some of the details on that. For today, you will notice that there are pillar candles. You may have candelabras or standing candles. The candles that are frequently behind are the office candles. So as an altar guild aside, if you're doing Eucharist, you will light the candles here. It depends on the church's tradition as to whether the office candles are also lit. Most churches that I know like to light all of them, but not everyone does. So let us begin. So the altar candles are lit. Normally they are lit just before the service. That allows the congregation that is entering to realize that this will be a Eucharist service. If it is morning prayer, these candles are not to be lit, only the office candles in the back. So it is a nonverbal way of helping people before they even look at their bulletin as to what kind of service they're going to have. Now, if for some reason they're not lit before the service, that's okay. Just make sure they're lit by the time you get ready to set the table. So the two times that you would normally light them are before the service or right after the peace. So this section will be as if the table has not been preset before the Eucharistic service.
We're going to start with the corporal and laying it out. If you have, you can see on this altar there is a plastic protection that Bishop Marty centered up. The corporal goes directly on that, and recommended that the folds are such that it's easy to refold to capture anything that might have been spilled or dropped on it. So just with those easy folds to the top. And you can see in the positioning of the corporal, oftentimes they are embroidered with a cross, and we want to position the cross so it is closest to where the celebrant will be offering the Eucharist. Next, we're bringing forth a chalice with a purificator. And then I also brought the paten with a single priest host on it. And oftentimes, depending on the set, those may rest well and nest in that way. And so before the chalice and the paten are dressed, just nest them as shown there. Next, we place the pall on top of the paten and priest host. And then for typically during Lent, we'll show you a very simple setting. At Holy Spirit, where this is being filmed, we don't dress the chalice and paten during the Lenten season. So we have chosen just a basic veil today to show you that option. And again, you just want to center up, and we find we have several different sizes of veils. And so good, again, if you're working with the Altar Guild, they are very particular about this. If it's your first time, you might want to pull it out ahead of time and see if it's something that you can fold up, or if you want to have them draped on both the front and back. The last thing that gets placed is the burst, and inside there you'll typically find an extra corporal and an extra purificator for two. If you are using 2 chalices, you would most likely have 2 purificators. Today I just loaded 1. And that just centers on the top. And with that, the table is, what we would typically do is set this ahead of the service. So when people come in, this is what they will see on the altar. I'll also bring over the altar book. Stand, so we're ready. And it just rests there until it's needed.
So a couple of extra comments. One, depending upon the priest's dominant eye, they may ask you to place it here or here. There is an Anglo-Catholic tradition where it is supposed to go on one side, and then after Eucharist either goes to the other side or comes to the center. This is a point of asking whoever the priest is celebrating where they would want this, and always good to ask them before the service starts so you don't have to have excessive conversation as you're setting table. And it looks better for the congregation if the hinge side is on the front, because if you do have a fully loaded one, it will pop up a little bit. And that will be seen by us behind the altar, but not by the congregation.
You can also see I'm standing to Bishop Marty's left. That is, for us at Holy Spirit, great proximity to the tabernacle and the credence table. There will be other churches, perhaps that have a center tabernacle or an under the altar tabernacle. And so depending on, again, what is the tradition there, it's great for a deacon to go and, if you can, ahead of time, observe a couple of services, see what is the tradition there, And then if there are things, as Bishop Marty said, with a dominant eye or just the ability to move behind the altar, then you can make some adjustments. Oftentimes you'll hear deacons say, "I am the bishop's right hand," and so deacons are often standing at the right hand, but that isn't always the case.
The other thing to remember is some priests will want assistance with the altar book of turning pages or pointing where they are on the page as they recite the prayer. If that is the case, you will need to be right there wherever the altar book is residing, whether it's on this side or on this side. The other thing to remember is the wingspan of the celebrant, especially if they are high church and it's a big altar, they may bring their arms out in the orans position as opposed to a smaller altar where they may be doing this. Always good to have a conversation with the celebrant beforehand so that you kind of get an idea about how large a personal space they're going to need so that, well, frankly, you don't get your nose taken off by a hand. This is also a good time to have a conversation about how much genuflection the priest does. So for a true Anglo-Catholic, when they approach, they will put their hands and they will do a full genuflection down. If your knees allow, you can copy it. If your knees do not allow, then what you do is you just do a simple bow. This may occur a few times during the Eucharistic prayer. If the person is broad church, their body motions are probably going to be fairly still. Just keep an eye. Anytime a priest does this or does this, it is a good time to mimic that just so that there is a seamlessness. This is the theatrics. The other thing to also copy is whether or not they cross themselves. And on that, it's worth a discussion with the priest about if it's your way of worshiping God, of figuring out how that will look. Oh, okay. Shall we begin to set table to celebrate?
Good. So this is the altar as you would find it as we move from the Liturgy of the Word to the Holy Eucharist. And normally there is perhaps a choir time or some kind of music or a quiet time to be able then to truly set the altar. So that's what we'll go through now. And again, you may see positions of things differently. What we don't have out here, we are a church that the gospel book stands during until the gospel is proclaimed and then returns to the altar with its binding out here. We have room on this altar for that. So that is one thing that I work around when I am and plan for when I'm here at the altar. But then it's just a simple setting aside the burse, folding up the veil.
How you fold the veil may depend upon whether or not you redress everything. For deacons who are working with me, I do not have it redressed. It is removed from the altar after we are done with Eucharist, but some priests like to have it redressed. And this is what you call the stack.
The stack. All right, so we're going to take off the pall, set down the paten with the priest host. And again, many of these patens you can see are not deep and they can be slick. So just try to, it's a good reinforcement for not moving quickly and moving very watchfully of what you're handling. And then the purificator goes to the side. And as I begin to set the altar, I learned this order from dear Deacon Myrna Cheney, who was our dean of the school. And she always reminded me, bread, wine, water, water. And so that is what I say to myself before I go and set the table. So I'm going to go get the bread. And for us, we have some blessed bread here. I also have a small patent we use for the gluten-free. And so that is placed here. We always have a box of the wafers that we can add to the count. So there's a real partnership here, knowing how many we are serving. And the ushers can often give you a sense of count, or if there's someone else who is assigned that job. But to be able to have a fairly accurate count of who you're working with and how many you can anticipate serving. And if it's a congregation full of Episcopalians, you can imagine that you would serve most of them. If you are doing a Eucharist at a different kind of service that has a very mixed community-wide crowd, I still prepare for all of them, knowing that many may not be of a Eucharistic tradition, but anticipate that you would have enough and more than enough.
And as she gets the wine, the one thing to remember is make sure that the gluten-free wafers do not touch any of the regular wafers unless they are pre-packaged and already have a cellophane separation. The reason for getting an accurate count is to make sure that you have enough so that the priest does not have to stop in the middle of distribution and consecrate fresh. The other thing is you don't want to have too much to where now you have to figure out where do we store it, how much reserved sacrament do we have. So this does take some time to get a sense in each community.
What we have found at Holy Spirit is that the record of past services really helps us to see what the trend is for how many people may be coming and how many we may preload in the ciborium, and then how many we might need, what's in the tabernacle that we can take from, and then we always have a bread box that allows us in groups of 5 to bring in more. We are of the tradition where we like to have about 20 extra at all times because we have Eucharistic visitors that are going out. Or we may have another service during the week. So it's just good to look ahead and, again, as Bishop Marty said, understand the tradition of storage here. So we've done bread, now wine, and we have at Holy Spirit we use 2 chalices. So for our first service we are often filling a chalice about 2/3 full for intinction. And then the flagon remains on the corporal for blessing during the service.
As Dorcie gets the water, one of the things to remember is you want the different vessels to be open. This is a tradition. There is nothing canonical or rubrical. The priest is to place their hands on these, but the concept is if they are open, then I guess Jesus comes in and gets out. So there are a lot of theologic discussions about that, but this is our tradition. One of the things to remember is trying not to get wine on the altar, especially not on the altar cloth, because that can be time-consuming to fix and to clean up. So you'll always want to, as you saw Dorcie, to clean that lip. One of the things to remember to keep in good graces with the Altar Guild, most purificators do have embroidery in the center. Make sure that you do not use that part to clean the wine up, or if you are distributing the chalice, to have lipstick on it. This is much harder to clean than the rest of it, so make sure you use the two ends.
I'll return with the water, which we put in both vessels.
In an Anglo-Catholic tradition, the deacon would present the water for it to be blessed, and it would be the short blessing of just doing this, and then it would be used. It is a difference in theology around water. Not all priests do it. People who are in the broad church tradition tend not to.
And it is our tradition here that is not a practice, but important to, everything I think for us as we talk through this today reinforces that importance of partnership with either your supply or appointed priest. And for all of us who do get the opportunity to serve with Bishop Marty as she travels around the diocese, the opportunity to learn how you are most comfortable with things as well, because that may be different than what we practice on a traditional Sunday. So we've done bread, wine, water. The second water is the washing of the priest's hands. I have some acolytes that also offer to wash my hands. That is not necessary. So we are good to work with our acolytes and let them know that it is the celebrant that whose hands we are washing.
And this is based on our old Jewish tradition. So a couple of points is not every church has this as a practice. The other action to remember is almost every church does also offer hand washing with alcohol. If you are going to be dealing with silver chalice, what you did not see is before we began this is Dorcie and I went ahead and washed our hands to let them dry before we touch the silver. Silver does not like a lot of excessive contact with this waterless hand sanitizer that is alcohol-based.
Now the hand washing typically takes place at the side of the altar, and you can see we have the lavabo bowl and the cloth.
Lavabo towel.
Yep. And
so a simple signal is I'll put my hands there, and she'll pour water mostly over the fingers. This is more symbolic. When I turn my hands over, that's a good and easy symbol to stop pouring. You can train the acolytes to do this, because frequently acolytes are the ones doing this. Mm-hmm. The priest is to take that. It is, if you are Anglo-Catholic, there is a prayer said, and we turn to the wall, both of us.
Okay.
And then the priest will dry their hands, will face each other. The priest will place the lavabo towel back. You'll notice it is on the left arm, and then we will gently bow to one another. For a broad church, none of that may happen other than maybe the washing of hands.
And I think the simple
simple head
bow.
nod.
Yep.
And that is just good manners.
Mm-hmm. If you do have a second chalice, that waits on the credence table until such time as right before we are ready to serve.
If you wind up serving in another diocese that has very large churches, you may see more vessels on the altar than this usual, but this is the standard for most churches of having the extra wine for a second chalice, having the chalice, having a ciborium. You may have a second paten or another smaller ciborium for gluten-free, and then the paten, which may have either the breaking that breaks into 4 pieces or the larger one that breaks into 24 pieces. A lot of that depends not only on the church, the particular congregation's tradition, but also the size of the church. We use these larger ones really for theatrics so that people at the back of the church can see when the priest raises the host. If you have a very large church, the 24-piece one is even better and would stand up like that. Okay.
All right. As Bishop Marty covered, there are ways to support one another here. That coordination of arm span, what kind of support in setting a book, or if you're using a large print service leaflet, which other churches have gone to as well. But then we then prepare the congregation for Eucharist. And do we want to just move then to a serving?
Sure.
Okay.
Before we start the serving is, if you have a priest who is farsighted, they may not want this. They may have it flat on the altar. Just ask them beforehand. So during the Eucharistic service, for Anglo-Catholic, anytime they say Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, unless they are holding the wafer or the wine, they are likely to cross themselves. As they go through, when they have raised the host and demonstrated its presence, when it comes back down, they will frequently genuflect all the way down. That is generally a signal for the deacon to also at least nod their head. The same when the chalice is raised. When it comes down, they will do this. If it's somebody who is broad church, you will not see that hand motion. And I think that's the particularities of celebrating broad church versus Anglo-Catholic.
How about the bells?
Ah.
We are a bell-less church, but should we address bells?
So this will be something that generally the deacon does not do, because the deacon is assisting the priest, but the deacon is frequently asked about Sanctus bells. There are actually several different traditions. The simplest one is that when the priest is about to start celebrating, the bells are rung 3 times to remind the congregation that we're now beginning a different part of the service. In prior eras, it was a signal for the congregation to kneel on the kneelers. However, in the current time, people may either kneel or stand as they are able. The other time that Sanctus bells can be rung is either when the host and the chalice are raised. At each time, they may be rung once. And then at the end, they may be rung again 3 times. There are other traditions. And the biggest thing is, if you are helping the acolyte, to make sure they have something or some way to muffle the bells when they finish ringing them. And there are a variety of things. The simplest one is there is a pillow, and the acolyte is kneeling and rings them and then puts them on the pillow, which immediately silences it.
We are not a church that has Sanctus bells here, but they do at the cathedral, and at All Saints up in Columbia Falls Whitefish are 2 that I've experienced. So.
Yep. Now we have consecrated everything. We have done the Lord's Prayer. We have now broken the host wafer. Next is the presentation, which allows the congregation to know that it is time for them to come forward to receive Holy Communion. One of the things that I like to do is I will hand the paten to the deacon and a chalice to the chalice bearer, who may be on either side. There are some priests who want to do this all themselves, and if they do, they will have said, the gifts of God for the people of God. They may ask the deacon and the acolytes or the chalice bearer to hold it up while they point and say the same words. Okay.
Good. And then in terms of service, we have some priests who prefer to serve themselves completely without any assistance from the deacon. Other times we may receive bread and then we serve the priest or bishop. We also share in the chalice. And again, we offer two. One is for intinction and one is for common cup. I've also served in churches where they're using both chalices for both. So again, just depends on the tradition. But then we serve one another, and then the next folks that we serve, once we have filled that second chalice, if we are a second chalice family here, then we move, if you have an organist and your altar party, that you want to make sure that they are all served before we begin to serve the congregation. Again, if you're a visiting deacon, you'll want to know in which direction do they serve. Are they filling from both ends, or do they start on the right or the left, so you're able to be of good service? And will you need to be a chalice bearer, or do you have plenty of folks to take care of that service, so you are personing the altar to be there perhaps to serve a gluten-free wafer so the priest doesn't have to clean hands between? Or to refill a chalice, whatever is needed here. We also have a tradition at Holy Spirit that the priest serves one rail of people, and then we hand off the ciborium to the deacon, and the deacon serves one rail. So it just, again, depends on the tradition, and you may find if you are serving with a priest who hasn't had much experience with the deacon, they would often ask you, well, what is your practice? What would you prefer? And that's where you continue to form that partnership, offer suggestions, knowing that the responsibility for worship ultimately rests with the priest.
If you are serving the bread, one of the things that any congregation you are assigned to that you can teach them, because there's always the question about how do I know who needs gluten-free? Teach them left hand, right hand face down. So if they are married, the wedding ring is at the very top, and they put their hands like this, and until you're ready to hand them the gluten-free wafer, then they can flip it over. And again, this is the traditional hand formation to receive the bread. Make sure if you are the assigned deacon and have a visiting priest that you do have that conversation before the service begins to let them know how the altar rail gets filled and fed. I was the priest of a congregation which did not have a side door, so people who came up then would encounter people who came back, and what they did is they would come up and start on either end and fill to the center, which meant when you distributed bread, you started at that end, came to the middle, walk all the way over to the far end, and then feed back to the middle, which then allowed them to then funnel out safely. That's the only church I've ever seen that, but it can be very confusing for the priest or the visiting bishop if they don't understand how the altar gets filled and fed. For most churches, if they have a supply priest or the visiting bishop, they really don't care, but it does help with the smooth flow of people getting fed the body and blood of Christ.
Oftentimes, if I am not serving a chalice or serving the bread, I will wait to the side of the altar when the rail has been fed, and any others in the congregation that the ushers have said the priest and one chalice bearer goes out and serves. As they return, then I begin to either work with the acolyte or work on my own and clear the table. There are, I think we might, I fielded this question on Sunday, are we a church that consumes the wine or not? And again, different churches may have different practices. At Holy Spirit, we do not consume the chalice. We after service work with the altar guild, and it is taken outside, and we pour it in front of the columbarium. But other churches have other practices. We also have folks within our midst, wherever we go in church, who may struggle with substances like wine. And so we have seen really a going away of drinking in full view of the congregation. So I would just encourage deacons to understand the practice, and then from your work in the church and world, if there are practices that you might recommend. So because we don't want the Eucharist to be a re-traumatizing for people in the congregation.
So if the priest is Anglo-Catholic, they will ask that the wine be consumed before the end of the service. Again, the sensitivity for those who have an allergy or an addiction to wine is they will then turn their back to complete drinking it. If it is still fairly full, they may ask other parts of the altar party who are over 18, over 21, to finish the chalice. Now, this gets to the question about the legality. Is because this is considered the body and blood of Christ, they are exempt. It is just probably not wise to have a 10-year-old acolyte consuming the body and blood of Christ in large amounts. The parents will probably get very upset, because even though it is the body and blood of Christ, it is also still alcohol. Otherwise, so for example, because I cannot take regular wafers, if there is any wafer bits in here, which happens even if they're drinking from the chalice, it gets covered, put off to the side, and there are two ways of disposing this, because remember, this is consecrated, as is this. Is either the church may have what's called a piscina, which is a sink in the altar guild room that goes straight into the ground, into what is consecrated ground. It can go in there. Or if you do not have a piscina, then it goes out, but it must remain on the consecrated grounds around the church. And pouring it out by the columbarium is a wonderful gesture of unity with those who have gone on before. Anglo-Catholic priests will not be happy about that. So that is a negotiation, and again, means that it's very important to figure out how much wine you need, and it's better to pour a lighter chalice and just have the rest of the wine here that can be held in reserve. The only other exception is if you are serving in a congregation that occupies a building with other churches, or is, for example, at the moment, St. Stephen's in Billings worships in a space that is an assisted living, so there are other churches that come in and have services during the week. Where do you store safely the consecrated wine and wafer? And that is a discussion to have with the altar guild when you're first assigned to a church, so that you know. And if there is no place, then everything needs to be consumed by somebody before the building is cleared. Altar Guild is frequently used to helping with that.
All right, so we imagine that everyone has been fed, and so now it is time to clear the table. Oftentimes the priest or bishop will go and sit to the side, and then what we try to do is combine. I'm not going to combine these because these are blessed and this is not, but typically put all of them in the pyx, and then you can either move them to the credence table, or you may have an acolyte who is just immediately loading them into the tabernacle. But let's just imagine that these are going to the credence table. Imagine this paten is empty. We set to the side. We fold with not much flair. And to restack, if you're not redressing, the pall, the burst and veil can be stacked, and this stack heads over to the credence table in a handoff. If you have the benefit of an acolyte, you just want to make sure that they have it in good stead before you let it go. And again, as Bishop Marty said, this stand may stay to the side. It may come center. What is your preference?
I prefer it to come to the center. There are some priests who move it from one side to the other as a symbol that communion is over. I move it to the center because I am also then going to bless from this position.
Okay. All right, but we typically leave the stand on the altar, so it is there for use. I do serve with one priest who only uses the Book of Common Prayer, and it is always here for the entire service. So I know if I am serving with them, everything then just needs to be placed higher up on this square, so there is that room. But again, as you get to know people, as you watch, if you have the benefit of observing them ahead of time, that just helps you to be more anticipatory with your questions.
And that does bring up a good point, is you have priests of different heights. So if they're my height or taller, having this out some works just fine. If you have a priest who is about 5'6", and you have the chalice out here, you see how far out I'm having to reach. So when you are setting table, be mindful of the physical limitations of the priest. I think that's...
Yeah, I think the last thing I would mention is we have these sleeves can easily move things on the altar, and so allowing just enough space that a priest host doesn't get caught on one, that some of the wafers don't get caught on one, but just know that these we have this lovely lip here, so it's good to be aware of your space and like, how high do I move? How do I move around this, just to make sure that we maintain as much of a flow as is possible.
And that does, if the priest has a full chasuble, the possibility of something being swept off from this area is not zero. Keep an eye out. So if the priest host goes skittering away, you can also carefully bring it back. One of the things that you'll see me do if I have a full chasuble, which will come forward very easily, is you'll see me put my left hand when I am doing a blessing. It is nothing except keeping the chasuble out of the way when I am blessing, because I already have to remember my sleeve.
Good. The other setting we wanted to show you before we address what it might look like if the altar is against the wall, we wanted to show you what a Lenten setup might look like here in a very simple setting. So I'm going to get back our corporal. So when I came to set on this, we are recording this in the season of Lent, right after the first Sunday in Lent. So when I came to the altar this week, there were the pillar candles. There was a simple ceramic paten with the host, and there was a simple ceramic chalice covered as this, and the altar guild had just placed them this way. They could also be placed this way as we would when we were ready to unstack. But to give the full visual to the congregation, this was how they chose to set it. And again, absolutely fine. You can see what all is missing, but that is the simplest of settings, and then you begin to set the table with just these on it.
One final comment about, since we are using pottery, silver is actually better at killing and neutralizing pathogens, which means you have to be far more anal retentive if you are the chalice bearer of wiping and turning, and using another part of the purificator, and if need be, go to a second purificator. Especially since we are still in winter, so we still have our respiratory viruses around. So, most of our churches do have altars against the wall. Again, most churches are not using them, but some do. Currently, the vast majority of our priests in seminary are not trained of how to celebrate against the wall. So if you are assigned to a church that does not have a freestanding altar and they are using against the wall, be very pastoral for a new priest or a supply priest who may not have been trained that way. So, but we're going to set up as if we are now going to celebrate with our backs to the congregation.
To be in position, as we talked about earlier, for where the celebrant will be, we'll want to have the corporal set, again with the folds, easily folded up, but the cross here.
This is the one thing that does not change, is when you have everything set up, everything is facing the congregation. Now, when we get ready for Eucharist in this position, it will look a little awkward because Holy Spirit moved this altar out some time ago, and the step that would normally have been there is now not there. So that's why. But if you are a deacon in a church that has continued and maintained their altar against the wall, there will be a step. And always, always remember that there is a step, because if you are used to celebrating facing the congregation, that is almost always a flat surface. If you are celebrating with your back to the congregation and you are the deacon helping the priest with that, invariably there are steps. It is not a long platform, and it is very easy to forget and take a step back and wind up falling. So always remember, if you are assisting with a Eucharist where the celebrant is facing the wall, that there are steps behind you.
Again, I'm going in the order of bread, wine, water, water. This is a question for you, Bishop Marty. I'm not used to serving in this direction. Do we leave a sight line at all for anyone to see, or just serve as we're?
Yeah, so you will actually block the vision of them as you are preparing, and that's okay, because trying to do it from the side means you have to have my length arm, and that may not be your anatomy.
Good to know.
One of the things, as she pours the water, remember if it's Anglo-Catholic, they'll want to bless the water. If they are broad church, they'll look at you going, One of the things to have a discussion with the priest or bishop who is celebrating is whether or not they want you to set the altar book. Most priests will set the altar book before the service begins, but not always, especially if it's a supply priest and the journey has been long and they come in, especially if the weather's bad, and they're there 5 minutes before, they may want your help in setting the altar book. And that means if there are ribbons, you need to ask them. Most seminaries train ribbons start up and go down from beginning to end. If you are a seminary of the Southwest graduate, you have been taught the opposite. And some have been taught just to have 2 ribbons, one at the very beginning, one if you're using Eucharistic prayer A or B, and then otherwise not using ribbons. Others will use ribbons for every page. But if you have a worship booklet, not a discussion.
Not a discussion. And I think a wonderful opportunity too, if you're serving with someone new, perhaps to connect via email during the week and ask a few of those questions that are perhaps easier to have you pre-prepared for. Other things, it's a simple conversation when you're in the sacristy getting ready.
So just so that you can see what a priest does is when they come up, remember if they are Anglo-Catholic, they will do a total genuflect. If you have good knees, you can also genuflect. If you don't have good knees, a simple bow forward. If they are broad church, you will not see that. This is one of the things that I learned when I was first celebrating with my back to the congregation, is to take the book, come around, face the congregation to start the Eucharistic service in the call and response. So the Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Lift up your voices.
We lift them up unto the Lord.
And then at the next statement, once I've said that, I will then turn while people are doing that response and place it back. Now you'll notice, because we've set it up mirrored, Dorcie is over here. If I need her, she will have to have moved over here, which then means the acolyte needs to be trained if we need additional things for some reason. For example, if somebody spills something. And so then the service will continue with that. What will then happen is the priest has to lift things up higher if they have the shoulder strength to do so and mobility. A lot of priests, if you see a traditional service where the altar is against the wall, you may actually not see any hand motions at all. And that's one of the reasons why churches that still are up against the wall frequently do have Sanctus bells, because then the acolyte is saying, okay, now they're handling the bread, now they're handling the wine, and now they have finished. And that comes from our Catholic tradition as well. The only other thing is when we are ready to present the bread and the wine is, I will hand her that, I will hand that, and then we will face the congregation and give the invitation.
What we didn't have on the altar today might be a cruet for those who may be going out to serve. And so if you do have someone who will be taking Eucharist out from the congregation, we will have that cruet as an extra vessel, and we treat it just as we typically pre-fill those, but add water as we do to the chalice and flagon. And then at the end, when we have cleared everything off, the cruet remains. We invite in our practice, we invite the lay Eucharistic visitor up at that time, present the cruet, which now has its cork and top on it, and say a prayer, and then the rest of the altar remains clear.
You bring up a good critical point. Deacons are frequently assigned to be in charge of the lay Eucharistic visitors. So it is important for you to understand how that is done. There are some churches where the lay Eucharistic visitors take from the reserved sacrament only, either before or after church, and the only thing we then do is hand them their communion kits. That is generally done either before or after the post-communion prayer. I prefer to do it after. That's my own personal preference. Okay. Other churches, they take fresh, and those are then consecrated at the consecration. So if you have a lot of Eucharistic visitors, so if you have a large church that has a large shut-in population, or they're taking to the hospital and there are a fair number of people that they take to, this will become a sea of small communion vessels, not only the small cruets, but also the small ciboriums that will contain that. Again, make sure the corks are off, the tops are off. The challenge is if you have communion kits of different age, there are different sizes, not everything is standard. So one of the things that will help you is when you take the cork or other top off the cruet, put it right next to it, because not all cruet necks are the same size. Not all ciborium covers are the same size, so keep them together, and that will help it flow more smoothly and quickly. And then for most churches, if that is how it is done, then you would also be the one who loads the kits. And it will either be you or the priest who distributes them to the lay Eucharistic visitors. There are some churches where that is done and then they are put off to the side and the Eucharistic visitor comes in after the service to pick it up. We have moved to more of having it formally taken to them at the altar and say a prayer so that the congregation knows that communion is going out.
I think the last thing we want to cover is a deacon distribution. And so I may just set the altar with that in mind for us, and then walk through that, the essence of that service. We do have it in print for you to make adjustments to as it fits for you, but you want you to be aware of that and the permission that goes into that. So I'll clear at this time.
As she finishes clearing, the permission that she talked about, please be aware, not every bishop allows what is called deacon's distribution. The bishop that I worked under as a priest would not allow a deacon to do a distribution in a regular main Sunday service. I do allow it, but there are limits. So, for example, if the priest is going on vacation and has chosen not to have a supply priest, you may not do a deacon's distribution. However, if the priest gets caught in traffic, has an accident, falls sick, and they were planning on having a Eucharist service, that is the time for the deacon to come in. There are occasions in isolated areas where a priest may not be available for any particular length of time, especially during the winter. And if so, you and I need to have a conversation about the rules and regs of doing a deacon's distribution when the priest is going to be gone for an extended period of time, or they're going to have an extended period of time of no supply. So without further ado, the bishop and the priest are not in on this conversation.
All right. So we would set the table. The difference that you'll see is that I would go to the tabernacle and get reserve wine and reserve wafer. And then I'm going to bring over a chalice. We know we already have some wine in that has been blessed, but we will imagine that we don't. And so from reserve, we are filling the chalice. And normally, before I start this service, when we are just transitioning from the Liturgy of the Word, I stop with the congregation and say something along these lines. This morning we will be offering deacon distribution of Holy Communion. With Reverend Terry not able to be with us, Bishop Marty Stebbins has given me the responsibility of offering communion from the reserved sacraments. We appreciate that in special circumstances like this, we are able to continue experiencing a Eucharistic-centered liturgy. I invite you to watch for the differences in this service. You will notice that there is no great thanksgiving for consecration, but rather, after a brief scripture reading, we will move directly to the Lord's Prayer and use of the reserved sacraments. At that point, we would lift up for the offering to be brought. We would come then and set the table. So we have the bread, we have the wine. There is no paten, there is no priest host. You can also still have gluten-free. Our gluten-free did come from the tabernacle. So in sensitivity to the people that are here, you can also have the gluten-free as well. And then once we've received the offering, the service that we practice continues. Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." So they said to him, "What sign are you giving to us then, so that we may see it and believe you? What work are you performing? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." Then Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." They said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." And then we go into the Lord's Prayer in the sharing. And then we say, as we would in a typical Eucharist, the gifts of God for the people of God. What you see different in a deacon distribution is that the deacon receives last after everyone else has. So serving of the altar party, serving of the congregation, and then afterwards the deacon being served themselves. And then we end with the post-communion prayer from either the Book of Common Prayer or if you're in the Enriching Our Worship series. So we close with that, and then you move to offering a dismissal or your final hymn, whatever is the flow of your service. You can see it's much simplified, but I think it is a real teaching moment. Mm-hmm. And to remember, as Bishop Marty said, these are to be used in emergency situations. I think we have offered deacon distribution here twice in my time, and it was when a priest fell ill or was prevented from coming. And our obligation is to work with the priest to, if we have a moment, to let Bishop Marty know ahead of time to ask that permission. Otherwise, immediately after the service to let her know that that is what's taken place.
You will notice as part of the deacon's distribution, there is no blessing at the end of the service. That blessing is always done in the name of the church and is canonically reserved for priests and bishops. Deacons, just like parents can bless their children, deacons can also bless just as if they were a layperson. But the blessing at the end of a Eucharist service is considered to be a blessing to the people from the broader church, and that has been canonically reserved for priests and bishops. Good. And I think the last thing I would like to say is Dorcie and I would like to thank the person who filmed us and the person who has edited this, James Gertner. So thank you, James.
Yes, thank you, James. And thank you to all of you who are curious about learning about this, getting comfortable with it. There is something about being around the altar. You know it is holy work, but it really, it can be a very emotional time. And so it really does help to practice, and we encourage you to do that with your priest, not during the service, but at times separate from the service, because there is no serving as a student in the school. But we also practice during the school to give you that, to build that confidence and that comfort, to move with flow and to serve with joy. Because if you're nervous, it's hard for your joy to come out. So we're hopeful that a video like this will stir some questions, build some confidence for you, and certainly know that we serve as resources for questions, as does the faculty within our Montana School for Deacons.
Thank you.
Thank you.